Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Psychics and more specifically their brand new skill, Ready Beat. But this list was actually created by Pro Manicus. This is not one of my own builds, so if you really like this deck, please give all the credit to Pro Manicus. So this skill is underwhelming at first glance. So this skill can only be used if all the monsters in your deck are Psychic monsters, so that initially is quite a bad restriction, right? We cannot use any non-psychic monsters, which is a similar restriction that Dragonic Resonance has. And I think that restriction is what holds it back from being like a really strong deck right now, just being able to kind of mix and match all these really good low-level monsters. And the deck contains one or less level 7 or higher non-light attribute monsters. So what this basically says is that we can have one copy of Esperard, and then everything else has to be our light psychic boss monsters. We can shuffle one card from our hand into the deck and then show your opponent one level 7 light attribute monster in your hand or one face-up can ready on your field. So this is a bit of an annoying requirement, to be honest. So some of the time you'll end up with a hand that is quite high-level stuffed, and what you really want to do is throw away one of those high-level monsters and maybe keep, let's say, Esperard in the hand. Unfortunately, because of the way this skill works, after you've shuffled a card into your deck, you must then still have a level 7 light attribute monster in your hand or a face-up Canry D, which is awkward because sometimes you're like, oh, I've got this Prima Katana I don't want right now, I'll just throw that away. But then you'll realize Prima Katana is the only level 7 light monster you have, so you have to get rid of another card and keep hold of that, keeping your hand in this kind of bricked state, which is kind of annoying. So it's just a minor gripe, but it does kind of add up with some other gripes as we get further in. So the effect is that we can add one level 1 or 4 light attribute monster with 100 or less defense from our graveyard to our hand. We can only add effect monsters with this once per duel. So only being able to get one effect monster once per duel really hurts the deck. First off, it means we can only use it to get Roman Pick one time. We could also only use it to get one Magical Miracle once throughout the game. If we could keep recycling both of these monsters, this skill would actually be quite good and might actually make the deck somewhat strong. But with this restriction as is, it does feel rather underwhelming. What we are able to keep bringing back is things like Candy and things like Peaceholder. Bringing back these less useful monsters most of the time, but being able to use them as tribute fodder pretty much all of the time can be okay. So Candy is pretty cool because it does work with a lot of the rest of the deck. We do have things like Jamp Up, which if we use Candy does gain a bonus effect. Same with Jamp Check and Jamp Start, all of which if we are using specifically Candy, we do gain these little bonus effects, which is okay, it's a nice little bonus, but for the most part we're going to use this to throw away probably one of our higher level monsters, get back a Candy, and then use Candy to either activate Magical Miracle's effect or just use it as tribute fodder and kind of go from there. So in that regard, the deck does kind of work quite nicely, but for now we'll go through the card by card and kind of talk about the boss monsters. The first one being Canry or Canready, depending how you want to pronounce it. So 2500 attack is a really decent stat line. 1500 defense is a little bit low, and this can come up. Obviously, something Ancient Arise can pop this, but that card isn't really seeing a ton of play right now. Requirement none, we can return one face-up monster with 500 or less attack from your field to the hand. This turn, while this card is face-up, you cannot tribute summon monsters with 1500 or more defense in attack position. So this little clause at the end is in here just so that you can't start doing loops by summoning multiple Canry Ds and then starting to use multiples of their effect again and again and again. But if we do manage to get 2 of these out initially before we use either of their effects, we can still use both of them back to back, which is pretty good. So what's the best way to use this? Okay, well, we're going to be using these on something like a Roman Pick. We can then use Roman Pick, put it back in our hand, because again, it's a soft once per turn, because that's how all rush cards work. Summon it, use its effect again, and use it 2, maybe 3 times in a turn. As a slightly worse version, we could also use Future Diviner, which does let us draw a card and then put one card from our hand in the graveyard, which is better than like a Mystic Dealer where you have to discard a card first, but not by much, as well as the fact we do have to have a level 7 monster to actually use that, but we can use it multiple times again with Canry D. We oftentimes were using this kind of Future Diviner loop just to try and dig so we can find Jamp Check, which is obviously just a one-off in the deck, so it does come up. But Canready is basically going to be our main boss monster. We need light monsters because our deck restricts us into that. Also, to use our skill, we need to have a light level 7 or a Canready on the field. So either this is in the field or on our hand, activates our skill, which does give us access to Candy, which is a nice little bonus. Oftentimes as well, we will be using Canready's effect on Candy, because what we can do is we can summon out Candy, then use Magical Miracle's effect to send it to the graveyard, bring back Canready, and then get Candy off of our board, because we don't really want to end our turn with a 100 attack monster on the field in attack mode. That's not really ideal. Next up, we have our Esperard. We're only allowed to run one copy of this because of our skill. But this is still a really, really powerful card. If our life points are 1,000 low, we can destroy 2 monsters in your opponent's field. Face up, face down, doesn't care what levels, we just get to pop 2 monsters. The downside is, how do we consistently get to 1,000 or less life points without just dying? When this effect does work, it is unbelievably powerful. It makes the deck feel so unfair. But when it doesn't come off, or when your life points aren't low enough, or the only time your life points would be low enough would be when you die, it's very underwhelming. So it's a bit of a hit or miss, but 2,500 attack still really good. 0 defense, very, very bad. It does mean it will be weak to things like shield and sword, although not many people are on it. So more often than not, it's going to be having this change to defense and then pierced over. Something like a Siesta Torero play into either something like a Piercing Samurai or a Innovator to just pierce over it. Then we've got 2 copies of Prima-Gitana, the Shining Superstar. Again, we still need bosses in the deck. This is a level 7 light monster, so it does work with the skill. The effect is still pretty good. Paying 1,000 life points obviously can be useful because we do want our life points to be lower than our opponents to use Roman Pick, and we do want our life points under 1,000 to use Esperard, so that's nice. But if we see Prima early, it oftentimes feels like a bit of a waste. 2,200 body is very, very low. 0 defense is not very good, but this can be a good finisher. The main issue is that these 2 traps exist. Negate Attack and Buffered Slime really punish you for going all in on an aggressive push with 3 monsters, which is exactly how Prima-Gitana wants to play the game. So it's a little bit awkward at the moment to make good use of this card. We've already talked a little bit about Roman Pick, but if your life points are lower than your opponents, we can pay 500 life points and the top 3 cards of the deck to the graveyard. If a Psychic type monster is among the cards sent, we can add any Psychic type monster from the graveyard to our hand. So this is really good. This is almost always going to hit a Psychic monster, which means we'll almost always be able to toolbox our entire graveyard, which is very, very good. Being able to get back anything and not just one of the cards that we milled is extremely powerful, which is why this card is limited to 1. And what we mean by that is we only have access to 1 copy of this card, not that it's actually limited 1, because looping this card can be really, really crazy. Then we have Magical Miracle, again, really, really good. The biggest annoyance of this card is that we have to have a Candy on the field, which means we can't use Magical Miracle as the 3rd boss monster. We have to basically use it to get out a secondary boss monster usually, next to our other boss monster and our Candy, which is going to kind of be sat in the middle. Then we can either get rid of our Candy using Canready and put it back into our hand, or we could use something like Jump Up, get rid of the Candy, and then summon out a 3rd monster anyway. But again, we could just do that Jump Up combo without having to use it with Magical Miracle anyway. So Magical Miracle is still really, really good. Being able to get back a high level monster for such low investment, because it's basically just 1 card for a level 7, which is incredible. That value is really, really strong, which is why this card is limited 3, even though I don't really think it needs to be limited 3. It's still a very, very strong card and one of the key combo pieces in the deck. Then we have the Future Diviner. We've already spoken about this, but it's just really nice. And 1,300 defense does actually come up more often than you think. We've talked at length about Candy, but on its own, it's not really in anything, but it's kind of interwoven into all the combos in the deck, and it does work with the skill, so there is that. Then we have our 1,500 attackers in Peaceholder and our Silent Assailant, which does give the deck a bit of aggro as well. We're all the time going to want to be able to threaten our opponent with 3 big attack monsters, and having access to a bunch of 1,500s really does help us with that game plan. Then we've got Tribute to the Doomed, which is pretty cool. Tribute to the Doomed is very, very strong right now because we can use this to pop maximums, we can use this to pop face down cards, which is very good because our deck doesn't really do too well into set 3 pass, so being able to get one of those out of the way and get direct attacking can be very, very good. As well as the fact that since, again, our attacks can get blanked a little bit by something like Negate Attack, Tribute to the Doomed will always do something. Even if our attacks then get negated, Tribute to the Doomed will still get rid of a problem card, so that it can't threaten us the following turn. Jump Up is another interesting spell card. We can send 1 face-up Psychic monster from our field to the graveyard to special summon 1 level 7 Psychic monster from your hand face-up to your field. If we sent Candy to the graveyard, the monster special summon gains 1,500 attack. That can be pretty cool. Going up to a 4,000 attack Canready or a 4,000 attack Esperard can be very, very powerful if we're going to try and push for the win, as well as this is the only way we have to get out a triple boss monster board. Again, triple boss monster boards are in a weird place right now because we do have access to Buffered Slime, we do have access to Negate Attack, and the big monster that will punish you for doing this is always going to be Royal Rebels Doom Metal, which will just blow up your entire board, do a ton of damage, and then attack you directly for a ton. So going into these high commitment boards oftentimes will just get you punished. Then we have Talisman Auxiliary. Again, we need ways to out maximums. We don't have a ton. We basically have Esperard, which is very situational. We have Tribute to the Doomed. and Talismanic Sealer is the other way, as well as the fact weakening a monster just so that we can attack for massive damage is going to be really important. This deck is basically a very aggressive style deck, so we do want to just punch in for as much damage as we can, and recycling cards is still pretty cool. Then we have Jamp Check, limit 1 unfortunately, but if we have 2 or more face-up psychic monsters on the field, including a normal monster, we can look at up to 2 face-down spell trap cards on your opponent's field, destroy one of them. Then if we have Candy face-up on the field, we can gain 1,000 life points. So gaining 1,000 life points can actually be very relevant, because it means we can then pay for effects like Roman Pick and Prima Gitana, as well as being able to look at 2 of your opponent's back row is extremely powerful. Unless you stare at exactly Negate Attack and Buffered Slime, you can almost guarantee to get your attacks through and get some damage in that turn, which makes this card so powerful, which is why it's such a shame it's limited at 1 copy. I believe the reason this is limited is because Konami believe other people would play it because it is probably the best back row hate, and if you were to include like a small psychic package, other decks would play it. I mean, just thinking about it off the top of my head, you could just include 3 Peace Holder, 3 Silent Assailant, and then 3 copies of Jamp Check, slam that into an aggro build and probably pop off with that, which would be very frustrating, but it's still annoying for us that our only good back row hate is limited 1. Then we have Jamp Start, which is place 2 psychic monsters from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck in any order, add a psychic type normal monster from your graveyard to your hand, and if we added Candy, we can gain 1,000 life points. The best way to think about Jamp Start is it's like an extra body. We can set this on one turn, flip it up on another turn, and then instantly get access to one of our psychic normal monsters, which then we can use as a body to be tributed or just summon out as a 1500 attacker and be able to do stuff with it there. It's okay. Being able to shuffle cards back into our deck, or put them to the bottom of our deck, I should specify, and then we'd have to shuffle our deck afterwards if we want to have access to them, is also pretty good. We do want ways to keep our deck full of cards, and being able to put in important cards that we want to draw over the turn can be very, very powerful. Then Negate Attack and Buffered Slime. These cards are just incredible. Every single deck is on both of these cards. We shouldn't even really need to talk about them. If we pop our opponents, we're in a fantastic position. If ours get popped, we're in a really, really bad position. We don't want to see these cards too early though, because a lot of the time, any card you get played early will get popped by things like Jamp Check, and cards you see later into the game are likely to stick around longer because your opponent will already use their back row hate. And then we're on Forever Freeze, which is pretty good. This card is actually really strong into a lot of decks right now. This is really good into Dragius. This is especially strong into the Royal Rebels and specifically Doom Metal, who can threaten your entire board. As well as it's good into Machines, which is arguably one of the strongest decks right now, because they do run 2500 attacks like Ultimate Flag Mech Gold Rush. So this card is pretty good against a lot of decks. There are a couple of decks this card is completely useless against though, in which case you'd ideally want to be discarding this with something like your Tribute to the Doomed, or discarding it with Future Diviner's Effect. So even if we have it as a dead card, we can still get rid of it and still use it in some sort of value. So this is the deck. Overall, my opinion is this deck is actually very, very fun. I think I really enjoyed playing this deck. Even when we were losing, I was having a blast just piloting this deck, and being able to see all the little interesting plays you can make is really, really fun. Unfortunately, the deck does have some big drawbacks that really holds it back from being like a meta threat right now. The main ones being that, again, we don't really have a good way to beat set 3 pass. That's always going to be a big problem for a lot of these kind of decks. As well as Royal Rebels Doom Metal is going to hard punish anything we try and do. As long as Negate Attack and Buffered Slime are in the meta, any kind of full aggression deck is going to have to be really, really careful how they approach the game, because if you do just go full aggression, your opponent flips over one of these trap cards, you don't have one of your own to protect you, your board can then get completely broken and take a ton of damage on the crackback, which does make these style of decks a little bit awkward. I do think that Psychics does still have some potential, maybe with a different skill other than Ready Beat, because they do have access to 3 or 4 okay skills right now. Ready Beat is what we're seeing the most innovation with at the moment, and the most experimentation because it's still new, and the effect is still very powerful. But I personally think if I revisit this deck in the future, I'll be trying out one of the other skills to see if I can make it work any better. But let's find some replays so I can show what I've been talking about.
シュデュエル。いくよ、ラッシュデュエル。